Hey there, it's Alex. We're going to do another AJH Radio Free Earth broadcast. So I want to know a little bit about what this is going to be sort of focusing on, and I'm also going to be let know of who I am and what I do. My name is Alex Hislop. I am a psychic medium. I was able to hear spirits in multiple capacities. Um, in 2015 upon a certain kind of psychic awakening. Previous, I was able to see certain kind of colors and auric discernment, in which let me know that spiritual entities were around me, or at least that I could view them in a certain kind of fashion. It sort of developed into something else, 9-10 years later, where I'd be able to communicate with them in multiple kinds of ways. Open channeling, speak with them within my mind, other kinds of stuff too, different kinds of stimuli felt, visions, flashes, things of that nature, different kinds of dreams. And I'm able to communicate with them, and the experiences that I've had within the past 4 or 5 years have painted a certain kind of picture in regards to some of it. I became aware that there is a certain kind of immorality culture that exists, certain kinds of spirits able to do certain kinds of actions within the vicinities pertaining to some of us in ways in which makes it seem viable and sanctioned, as well as allowed in certain manners pertaining to some of us, in which is disconcerting, but also, and I'm hesitant in regards to saying this, but understanding in a certain kind of manner. Understanding for a reason, if you start to take a look at some of the culture that exists pertaining to some of the brimstone that I was able to discern as a psychic. Some of the things that I would start to understand was that some of the circumstances in regards to survival pertaining to some of the spirit around us revolved around immorality promotion. You think about eating, drinking, sleeping. You think about the necessities of life. Even in the spiritual, there might be certain kinds of energy promotions that keep people afloat, things of that nature. And if I was to tell you that immorality promotion and violence and things of that nature being promoted and utilized in regards to certain kinds of systems, and that is life-sustaining, it might seem surprising in a certain manner, but it is nonetheless, I feel, a truth. Through communication and experiences, I have sort of surmised and pieced together that at times there are those who are surviving by way of immorality promotion, and not just surviving, but thriving and making a living, quality of life in regards to that sort of thing. And it's not just this passing by of spirits at times in which has been masked and labeled in a certain kind of manner, this sort of flighty kind of thing as negative spirit passing through, that sort of thing. I love the joke. I used to make that joke up here and there to a certain degree, and it's this sort of thing that says oh, it was a negative spirit, break out the juju, the sort of stuff, hang the garlic and all that sort of thing, and that stuff really does work, and that's the great thing about it, is that it really does do certain things spiritually. Not only you hang up garlic to protect yourself in regards to certain spiritual beings behind the scenes, you don't have all these spirit teams move in with all these gadgets and things of that nature, and all of a sudden you have a spiritual attachment in regards to some actions. You put down salt, you potentially have certain kinds of spirit that have interacted potentially with certain kinds of demonics before and things of that nature, and it's vice versa too. There are those who put certain things out for protection from certain kinds of moral beings at times. Again, and some people might take a look at that and say, well, why would you want to protect yourself from certain kinds of morality? And it's like that sort of thing where it's like, oh yeah, that pertains to certain kind of culture potentially behind the scenes, where you're trying to protect yourself from certain kinds of morality and banners and things of that nature. And it's one of those quirks that not too many people on this physical planet Earth would be, I think, I don't know if they'd be aware of it, but I don't think it's talked about often. And it's that sort of thing which sort of corresponds with some culture that deal in brimstone and immorality. With that being said, it's sort of, developed in many different paths. I started learning about different kinds of psychic activity that existed. My psychic abilities advanced. I learned different things. Different experiences lent towards me creating certain kinds of content in which certain society, I think, would take a look at and say, I don't know if I'm too comfortable with that. But from another standpoint, you take a look at it from other kinds of societies and say that is normal. Not only is it normal, but for some culture it might be more so. And then of course that previous culture, I don't know if it's mandatory. I don't know about that. So it's a culture clash in regards to multiple kinds. Some in which believe in consent and some don't. And again, you take a look at the circumstances of certain society and why it is that it would, be considered to be mandatory to put in certain kinds of content experiences and videos and audio, which can pertain to content experiences, that sort of stuff, to defend, imagine that sort of draft kind of thing and saying, if you don't do 100 advocations in regards to defense, daily, something happens in a certain culture or society where it's like, where some culture might look at it and say that's a little extreme. But if you notice that there's a certain kind of defense in play by way of utilizing those 100 advocations, and that if the quota is met, that there's a certain defense that is also met, or at least hopefully, you say, okay, well that could be fairly important. Not getting that sort of stuff, happening might be detrimental in a certain kind of manner. I can see how that would evolve. And, for some of it, it might be that sort of thing that says you just start doing and it becomes normalified and you take it away. That could be damaging, to a certain extent. So, that's one of those things to talk about, I think, in a certain kind of way, at least a side discussion, sort of things to be able to stave and say, hey, if I've been putting, advocations, specifications, disclaimers, certain kind of informational placement to protect myself from the spirit and in regards to the spirit and things like that, and that sort of thing where you kind of get in a spot where you've been doing it daily and then sort of stop doing it, that economic actions behind the scenes and what can happen in regards to it is vitally important, I think, to a certain extent. But what I want to talk about is what this broadcast is about, what these content experiences are about, what this program and radio station, etc., Defined Marine Spirit Guides, is about. And it really has to do with certain kinds of quality of life, freedom, civility. I think civility is a good word. There's multiple things it's in regards to. I noticed that there is at times certain kinds of warfare happening in battles spiritually around some of us. And some of it has to do with our planet Earth and others that Marine Spirit Guides indicated. That sort of thing that I sort of saw had to do with certain kinds of ways to deal with warfare. So you think of it this way. If there was a certain kind of fall that happened, and I think that there was fall, what do you mean? A certain kind of fall from grace, a certain kind of retrogression for some, a certain kind of movement for others. Imagine that in the heavens that there was a certain kind that traversed downwards, regardless of whether what you call that, and that there was certain kinds of violent acts that had taken place. And you can see the metaphor sort of already in the, some of the books of faith. You can see, sort of Lucifer being cast down from heaven, that sort of thing, as almost being representative to certain culture, in which would, I feel, and would become something else later down the road. I think there's been multiple falls. I think that there's been multiple tells even before, what some would consider, the first great fall, whatever you call that. And some of it might have been argumentatives. Imagine, let's talk about some origin here, some origin story. Let's imagine that in the beginning, let's say that we emerged from self. Let's because there's many different kinds of origin theories in regards to spiritual, and one of them has to do with emergence from self, that God was, regardless of if he always was, and some people consider it to be that, being in a certain manner, and that when he decided that he wanted to create, that he approached it in a certain way. Let's say that he sectioned off parts of his personality, in which then, after I think enough planning and messing around, he decided to I think separate parts of his consciousness in a certain kind of meticulous manner, a safe manner, in which would emerge multiple aspects of himself in which he would be able to converse with, and which would evolve into something else. The emergence of other kinds of spirit, other kinds of gods, other kinds of beings. And this is one of the origin theories. There's many different kinds, that he manifested some, that he created others, that they emerged through miraculous means separate from God, if even God was one of the, origin stories to begin with for some culture, because he might not have been, it might not have been, she might not have been, etc. So, but in this origin theory, it's sort of, we're kind of going on from the path that maybe God emerged from self, regardless of if he was always there or not. So that sort of thing where he started interacting with aspects of himself in which I feel would emerge to forge their own identity. And after enough time and non-time, I feel that there would be certain kinds of I think one of the big ones is privacy. I think one of the requests. What was the first request? By one of those that were potentially created by way of this evolution of self, would be in regards to privacy, the asking of privacy. And I'm wondering if there are myriads of others, and I think that the answer to that would be, yeah, there is. There's many different kinds, and that's one of them. I am advocating for those that remain spirit guides needed in regards to this marking application, etc. Divine spirit guides to be protected, in which guys needed. I and others divine spirit guides are advocating for the AJH Radio Free Earth, and others to honor spirit guides to be protected, which guys needed. I'm writing for the disclaimers that guys need in regards to this AJH Radio Free Earth broadcast, that remain spirit guides needed to be displayed. Where remain spirit guides needed, the women's guys needed. I'm writing for the disclaimers that guys need in regards to the content that guys needed to be displayed. Where guys needed daily, the way spirit guides needed. So yeah, the idea that there was certain kinds of separation difficulties regarding some, either in the beginning or down the road. I think there might have been in certain manners, but there's parts of me, in fact, the larger part, I think, that feels that there wasn't as much problematics as what some insinuated. I think that it was very heavenly, potentially, that sort of thing, where the again, that spin in regards to certain kind of emergence in regards to morality. That sort of thing, where all of a sudden newer beings are created by way of the separation of certain aspects of self, in which then turned into family. I think family is one of the concepts again that was potentially born in that sort of regard. But then I think there was a branching out, sort of doing their own thing. Imagine if God created, by way of this separation, thousands. What if it was just a single? We can even just assume that there was 10. Let's imagine it was 10. That he separated, 10 from himself, which made 11. And imagine that after eons have passed and those 11 had been conversing and speaking, that one of those 11 or two of those 11 decided to also separate aspects of their consciousness to create more spirit, more God, more. And of course, there might have been earlier on, in certain aspects of this, in which was about that, God could perceive and be experiencing certain aspects. I'm wondering if he kind of looked somewhere once upon a time and sort of saw it from the perspective of that in which he separated in a certain manner. And I think he separated like maybe softly at first, meaning that he could still understand and experience in a very large fashion that separation of self, like him almost conversing to himself in a certain manner. I think that that's maybe where it came from. He probably sectioned off parts of himself in certain manners to be able to speak to himself in certain ways in a forerunning sort of concept. And I'm wondering that as he conversed with these, new creation and old, technically speaking, that I'm wondering if he looked at it from that perspective, more primarily at times, almost a focus on it, a highlight, where, the Godhead would be animated in a safe way. And in fact, probably there wasn't that much of a worry in regards to that sort of thing in the beginning, because they all cared about one another. I think still, nonetheless, he did put safeguards in play, obviously. And so I think that upon the continued separation of consciousness and the creation of that, it would eventually turn into something else. Maybe there was thousands at one point, hundreds of thousands, and and you could see that maybe like every day of the week, God would maybe look at it from a certain perspective or a certain highlight in regards to himself. He probably would have been able to put certain highlights, in regards to what maybe some would call the primary Godhead, where he'd have sections of himself which highlighted the perspectives of those in which, were emerging and had emerged in certain manners. So I think that for some, once certain branching off in regards to it, and further separation had happened, because there is certain moments, I think, thresholds, where you take a look at that evolution, that history, and you'll see certain moments where certain things are not necessarily as they once were. Something changes where God was once connected with a certain being in such manners where that had changed. I'm wondering if there was a request in regards to it, or if a conversation had happened, or if there was a viewpoint that had taken place, where it eventually that had emerged, a self-identity, maybe sort of after enough time and non-time, maybe someone taking a look at it and saying, I want to be something different, or a different direction, or something like that. So these forerunning concepts of a creation and where we potentially came from, potentially, sort of being metaphoricals for the down the road issues that would emerge potentially. So you take a look at what it would look like down the road, where there was past hundreds of thousands or even millions, and what is the first conflict that arises? Is it a disagreement? Do we consider disagreement to be conflict? Because these things here and there in the beginning matter greatly. You think about, and they don't have to matter, obviously, for what's acceptable. I mean, but some of it does. And there's that sort of thing where you take a look at that first argument that maybe God had with. Some might consider to be with himself in a certain manner, and some not so. Maybe that was part of the argument. Maybe a self-identity argument being one of the first. I don't know. Maybe direction. I thought maybe privacy, but those forerunning arguments, not necessarily seeming as terrible as what some would assume. Maybe by way of what some feel that it is. Nonetheless, down the road, it turning into something else, not just arguments anymore, but What was the first mudslinging? What was the first mudslinging? That's a really good one. That's sort of one. The first verbal spar, the first. What was the first clash? And that's an escalation right there, because mudslinging, verbal spar, and then fight. I would say like contact fight, not just sparring in regards to certain kinds of contact, but actual actual attack. And you got to remember that within these sort of discussions and events, that when that took place, you'd probably see most people in the vicinity just drop what they're doing upon a certain kind of bell being rung, and just everybody going over there and just seeing what the heck is going on, what is happening right now. And they must have just, what if they crowded around, and it's just like, what? Like, I wonder if there was awe, or if there was just this attention in regards to certain events like that happening. I'm wondering if it was like that in regards to a lot of different things, different kinds of creation, different kinds of first steps, building blocks. It wasn't just negativity. I mean, nowadays, if you say that a certain spirit attacked you behind the scenes, there is some in the spirit that would look at it and say, what kind? What kind? What did it look like? What we want to know. We want to talk about it. We want to discuss it. We want to converse it. And for some, it's not just this therapeutic one either. It's also the kind that's like, I like this stuff. I like that sort of thing. So, those forerunning conflicts, or if you can call that, or not so, sort of being, I know some people dislike looking at it as metaphorical, but it turning into something else. What was the first battle? True battle. And I've surmised that maybe, what if it was during a verbal spar, like, not verbal spar, a contact spar. Imagine, a certain kind of spirit that had emerged from God, and that's that sectioning off of consciousness and things of that nature, where there was certain kind of contact sport and things of that nature, something getting out of hand, and then all of a sudden you have a certain kind of fight happening. So how long before it happened again? Was it eons? Did something get worked out? Was there, again, I think that, like, that sort of thing where a battle happening, is maybe a tussle, and some people might view it that way, depending on how you view it. There might be someone saying, well, the first kind of, tussle and conflict might be different than a battle. And that might be a lot longer into the future than, to a certain degree, but eventually I feel it would take place in a certain context. I'm wondering if this direction that, parts of God would go, sort of alienated each other at times. I wonder if there was a moment where it's like, I don't want to hear from you, and then he just started creating and moving somewhere else. And it's just like, you can't run from God. And I don't wonder if it was just like playful banter because they cared about one another. Where it could back, in the day be that, without somebody saying, how dare you consider it just playful banter? It's like, God, you get out of my freaking face. All right, then fine. Because that's how I feel, to be true. All right, then. Certain spirit, always, there's certain people, again, trying to survive at times. It's that sort of thing where it's like, if you don't get, Alex in a certain kind of way, and it's really unfair to a certain extent. If there is spirit who are being poked and prodded in that sort of manner to, do something or get angry at him or be entertaining, whatever it may happen to be, I just, at times we need to be able to discuss certain things, and that's how I feel about it. Regardless, I think it would emerge to something else. And however that happened, I don't fully know how it happened, but I wish almost that it didn't, to a certain extent. And you would start to see something else emerge. And I don't know if that was near the first fall, what you would consider that. I mean, I think some would consider it one of them, because maybe there was a certain kind involved, a moving away or a retrogression, whatever you call that, in a certain kind of manner. You think of this, you think of the light, and there's many different viewpoints in regards to it, but you think about like this non-living higher power in regards to some of it, but other ones consider it to be a living entity in a certain kind of way. There's people who worship the light in regards to certain kinds of faiths and things like that, but there's also other dimensional existences too. Might not necessarily have been just in regards to the light, but one way I equate it is that, karmically speaking, morality creating progression within the light and access to new plane levels within the light, new surfaces. And imagine that, God, if he always was, does he still progress from morality? I think he does. So there's something about that I do agree with. And regardless if he was always there or not, was he always on a certain level? And then as he progressed, did he start to progress upwards? Like that's the thing that I can't wrap my head around, that's that sort of advanced spiritualist stuff that even some of the spirit would look at and say, yeah, some of that would be advanced in regards to Alex and other kind. A certain kind of IQ and intelligence is needed to be able to understand some of that. So regardless if he was always was, or if he emerged from his own probability or what have you, that sort of thing, I think that there was progression and retrogression within the light surfaces, in which he created many different things, multiple different things. I think that he, built and learned and learned to be able to utilize the light, that you could heal yourself and build things with the light, that it was not just this living setting, but it was well, some people would look at living setting and say, yeah, living setting. It's like, what if we were to tell you that there's living setting out there that you can't utilize as a certain kind of tool? And you'd be like, what? No, that's impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but there's some spirit that might look at it like that. That is, maybe that's not the normal, But, there's things like that where, if we were to say that you can utilize the physical, setting around us to be able to heal ourselves, to be able to manifest things, to be able to create things, to be, certain science to be like, well, if we could do that, then we would have by now. Why can't we do that? And it's like, it's something we still need to fully figure out. As a psychic, I'm able to feel certain kind of stimuli. As, I'm able to feel this, certain kinds of energies behind the scenes and things of that nature. It lets me know that there is things that we're able to do, that we can do creation and manifestation. So we can do that sort of stuff and affect the spiritual around us. And, that sort of thing where we take a look at some of the original dimensions and what they were able to create, even, in the beginning. It's amazing stuff that you take a look at and, marvel at still today in regards to a lot of it. There is, I think, certain kinds that would emerge eventually, in which would be a part of this sort of fall that would happen. I think there's many kinds to a certain extent, dimensional existences within dimensional existences, and multiple fold that has shown and recaptured certain kinds of events in different fashion. And I don't know what you would consider the last great fall to be, right? How many great falls has there been? Well, how do you classify great fall? What was the last one? What was the first one? It's a decent question if there is that sort of thing. And it's like, great fall, what do you mean? Frequency and vibration. Again, if we were to say that within the light there is plane levels, certain kinds of surfaces, imagine certain kind of surfaces that we can traverse by way of will, attention, intention. Intention is a real energy that I felt as a psychic, where we could, utilize intention, and I can feel I'm able to utilize, I can feel the intention overlapping, my physical in certain kinds of ways. It's not just that, I can feel beliefs, trust, forgiveness, multiple kinds of things, emotions. That's one of those ones that regular folk can feel. They can feel emotions daily. It's one of those things that lets you know that you're not just this flesh and bone, that you're not just, the other dimensional stimuli that you think you are, for what's acceptable, obviously, for what's acceptable. So you take a look at, these plane levels and imagine that your karmic color, remember those colors I was able to see as a psychic medium earlier on. One of the spiritualists told me once that is, spiritual colors that you're able to discern, and that the color is reflecting the karmic color. And I know there's many different kinds of colors out there. There's different kind of colors for moods, feelings, impressions. Again, it's not always representative in regards to karmic, but I think that some of it is. I think there's a baseline that is. there might be a lot of us that are white. Friggin' heck. I mean, that's the thing of it. Or so we think. What if that blue metaphor is more closer to the truth? Oh. Well, so within that sort of confines and context of that conversation, imagine that, the highest point within the light that you can ascend, that you can traverse to, that it's potentially dictated by morality promotion, that when you promote morality, that you go up and, in progression and gain access to new karmic levels in which reflect within your spiritual color. So again, you look at the physical light, spectrum, and that was one of the things that I based some of the early karmic paradigm guesses and conversations in regards to, because it's one of those things that I'm able to see and I'm able to equate, and it's also it also corresponded with what that that original spiritualist teacher in regards to myself sort of or one of them reflected to a certain extent. And again, you sort of take a look at the color spectrum here, and so yeah, I mean, you go from brown, something, there's a dark reddish in regards to it, but then you go upwards and you go to red, you go to orange, you go to yellow, you go to green, you go to blue, you go to violet, you go to magenta, you go to pink, and then you go to white. And that's sort of, that might be like, a bit of a metaphorical in regards to colored paradigms in regards to, karma, that sort of stuff. Imagine that there is different kinds of red planes within the light. Imagine that there's different kind of orange planes within the light. Imagine there's different kinds of yellow planes within the light. And again, near-death experience research does show us classic heavens of yellow, of golden light to a certain extent. I know it might be different in a certain kind of way because there's different dimensional existences out there, different kinds of light to a certain extent. But I think that there is things that are potentially based off of some of that in a certain manner. So you think about... So again, I mean, if you take a look at it, let's say that green is higher than yellow. And so if you're in the yellow planes of the light, and it's the highest that you can transcend, like the highest that you can traverse, you can't move higher up above it because that is what your karmic reflects. And the light equates that. The light can monitor and does monitor morality and immorality. And it needs to be, I think, said in more of a like... it's almost, in a natural sort of way, in an anatomy and setting sort of way. Like if we're beings of light and there is a light setting, we're potentially connected to that in many different ways, one of which happens to do with karma. So you think about that if you're located in the yellow planes and you progress, you promote morality, and all of a sudden you're gaining access to the green planes. You gain access and you traverse to these new areas of the light, and there's all kinds of spirit. And of course, there are those who are up above you and potentially in karmic progression in a certain kind of sense. And you think about those above you being able to traverse to your level. I mean, there might be blue spirits that are able to communicate with you while you're on the yellow planes and the green planes as you traverse upwards progressionally, and that sort of thing. So, that was one of the ways that I looked at it, and I think that some spirit might look at it and say that it's fairly simplistic because there is advanced in regards to it. I don't mean to offend or upset. It's just the way I look at it. It's the way I view it. But there is potentially, more advanced in regards to it, grid works and things of that nature, different kinds of shapes and things like that, in multiple kinds of ways, which is amazing in and of itself. But regardless, I mean, you think about if there was a large group of spirits within the light that had traversed downwards, whether willfully or retrogressed downwards in a certain manner. And I think I'm wondering if those first falls, it was just like, I wonder if they saw it and then they fixed it. An allocation of karmic gains, and karmic, karmic solving in a certain manner, which was, after a certain conflict resolution, not too much of a thing. And maybe it was, because again, we're talking about the first great falls. So maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't just as simple as, oh, we'll give you some karmic back, and that's the decent of it, if they didn't just traverse downwards. I am apologetic. I don't mean to be upsetting. I know it was probably an upsetting event to a certain extent. I don't know. I mean, I know about it spiritually behind the scenes in certain manners, but down here in my physical perspective, not fully. So again, you sort of think about, those sort of actions taking place and those sort of events happening. And what does that create later on? What kind of society emerges? Again, when we talk about spirits, and there is a lot of different colors of spirits. There's red spirits, brown spirits. I have noticed that there is certain kinds of black spirits, potentially dark light for some of them. So it tells me that regardless of what happened back then in the first fall, that there is, I think, like I said, when was the last great fall? So that would be one of those things, I think, that potentially lends towards current situations, depending on where we are located dimensionally. And it tells me either way that within certain dimensional thresholds, especially if it does adhere to aspects of the original karmic structure, that there is, lower planes, that there is certain kind of hellish dimensions potentially for what's acceptable. There might be spirits who just want to be read in a certain manner, where that culture is actually more reflective of something else. But again, my experiences as a psychic medium let me know that certain kind of brimstone and immorality has taken place in a certain manner. I am advocating for those gods and spirit that are protecting me currently to be protected, defended, healed, etc. For guys, I'm advocating for my defense and my guideship that main spirit guides need, as well as others to honor main spirit guides to be protected, defended, healed, etc. Main spirit guides needed. So, again, we continue on, and regardless, that sort of culture exists. And it's not just that, it's also other kinds of culture emerging, nations. You think about concepts, and this is a good segue, but you think about original concepts in which exist, and where do they stem from? Where's the origin theory in regards to it? Again, off of this origin theory in regards to God, what if his like in regards to a certain quality was the forerunning in regards to the birth of a concept? Or maybe that was the birth of a concept, creation of a concept, manifestation of a concept, evolution of a concept. And imagine it not just being a like of heroism or care for chivalry or kindness. Let's say it's kindness. And it turns into something else later down the road, eons later, where there's literal banners, nations, and factions in regards to kindness. Where some of them might actually point towards those sort of, origin theories, pointing towards that sort of, that creation of that concept. Maybe the first thought in regards to God pertaining to kindness. Some might look at it that way. So, again, there is potentially banners in regards to concept and that sort of way of looking at things that would emerge, but also, nations of dimensions that would be created, dimensional banners, different factions, different kinds of nations that would exist. You think about how, physical Earth-based is with the nations and how they interact. There is, I feel, a real spiritual in regards to it, in which exists, in which does deserve a certain kind of attention in a certain manner. I love the way the spiritualist communities that main spirit guides indicate on this physical planet Earth. Most of the spiritualist communities that main spirit guides indicate regarding physical Earth-based and others that main spirit guides indicate in regards to this Earth approach certain things. I like how they do it. I like how they speak with psychics. I love the positivity vibes in regards to it. I like again, we talked about, certain ways of viewing things. I do love that. I care about it. Different kinds of ways of doing things, different interaction. They let knows in regards to loved ones that have passed on. there is that sort of thing where I have been privy to certain things that let me know, a certain kind. And it sort of tells me that still, being able to facilitate goodwill and let know in regards to some of them is decent. And especially when you're dealing with a certain kind of dimension and species, can be amazing in and of itself. And even when psychics are giving readings in the physical, you never know how many spiritualist communities are doing their thing around them. Other dimensionals getting information as well in regards to spirits that have passed on and things of that nature. There's a lot of spirit that are doing things through our actions at times. So again, regardless, I sort of realized that we are in sort of a different era in a certain manner, that all the while as to there is that interaction in regards to spiritualist communities, which lets know of the positivity and the decent in regards to being psychic and that sort of thing, that there was also another darker aspect, a darker aspect that has to do with something else. And that there is a war and turbulence at times within the spirit happening. Again, my experiences, me getting, I've been attacked psychically. I have been attacked by way of certain kinds of visions, certain kind of interaction, certain kinds of, at times, let knows regarding forced incarnation. That's been some of it at times, but that's not all of it. Some of the things confound me to the point where I literally have to learn certain things to be able to understand the concept of harm in which has been invoked in regards to myself and others to a certain extent. The kinds of experiences that I've had would lead me to believe that physical earth-based at times, that the spiritual around them, around some, would not necessarily be reflecting fully what was being said in regards to certain information. When I say this, I'm not meaning to affect the spiritual around Earth in certain ways. There is a perception that also defends us in a certain manner and is decent. It also lets know of something that's potentially the majority. In fact, I think it is the majority, that there is enlightened experiences and existences out there. But there's also a darker aspect that is not being talked about to a certain extent. Especially if some of us physicals on this physical planet Earth are being attacked in certain manners near what's been insinuated in regards to myself, lets me know that this stuff is worth being discussed. And even if we weren't being attacked, doesn't necessarily discredit the importance of discussing and talking about the issues that are taking place. So, I created this AJH Radio Free Earth to lament about some of the things that are happening, to talk about some of the things that are taking place, and some of it does revolve around Earth. At times I've discerned Earth to sort of be a bit of a captive at times in regards to certain spiritual forces, and maybe not necessarily literally, because he does have a lot of defense. But there is let knows throughout my processes through multiple kinds of storyline, which I would start to understand really does exist within the lives of many. That you could have a past life that relates to sharks, and then all of a sudden you're a shark researcher, to a certain extent. So yeah, I mean, it's not just that though. It's also things within processes, puzzle pieces, the themes that I would see. And the discussions that would happen, the events that would shape around me, really kind of let me know how important story is, how important characters are. Yeah, and so, I mean, I'm going to talk a bit about, I think I'm just going to talk a bit about today, to be honest. And not today, actually, yesterday. Mundane actions, regular actions in the physical being utilized in a sort of negative fashion. Again, if there is that sort of immorality promotion taking place behind the scenes, is there those sort of times where we get attacked in a certain moment and we don't fully understand it? We pass on and see a certain kind of life review later on from something, maybe. I mean, that was always one of those ones, but again, it's near-death experience, right? And a lot of them are near-death experiences. If there was one where we could see a let know from a certain kind of resurrection with access to certain kind of memories, would it be something else after a certain amount of time? And there's some who walk people through it and say certain things somehow, like, for some of it, like we didn't experience certain stuff. I mean, it is the darker aspect of the near-death experience to a certain degree, to go through our experiences, and a lot of it focusing on the physical. But that's sort of let know that there is those, darker things at play, and especially what's been insinuated in regards to my process, which at times has been utilized to try and harm certain kind of earth-based. And some people try to take that as a line to attack me at times spiritually, but it's garbage. It really is. It makes no sense. It is. No, it's crap, because it laments upon, if you're using that to attack me to a certain extent, then what does that tell you in and of itself? The action itself to utilize that to attack me makes no sense. I mean, specifically, and that's one of those things. If it's how is it gonna harm Earth-based? How is that gonna happen? Who's utilizing, the let knows within my process to harm Earth? Wait a second. If everything's all hunky-dory, then that's one of those things, ain't it? Yeah. Well, that would be why, Alex. This is the case, Alex. You're gonna freak out one of these days. You will, because that's what they said. They said that it goes. That's what they're saying. I mean, we had to go for a reason. You don't know why it works that way. And again, you take a look at the kind of content that's created and the stuff that's said, and it really isn't that bad. It's for some, it's run-of-the-mill stuff. It really is. A let know of some of the darker aspects, and that there is negative spirits that exist, as well as, a let know as to, and asking the question as to why certain near-death experience research points towards a focus in regards to certain things. It shouldn't be the breaking point of something, shouldn't be the movement of something. I think it's something else. I think it has to do with some certain kind of events that are sometimes being tethered in regards to what I do at times, which then also says, like, what the heck and why? Because it's a good question. There's a big moving away there behind the scenes in a certain manner. But again, there is that sort of focus as to why, certain physicals would get a, life review that's focused on the physical, but not necessarily the other dimensional. Well, I mean, they just live their physical life in a certain manner, and they have a certain perception, a certain kind of thought process to a certain extent. This is that sort of stuff, but it's also that. I mean, how high up are they already? And that's what it should be, right? Being saved. I mean, that's the thing of it. I mean, if we're talking about passing on in the afterlife, going to the light, that's where I start to say, okay, so wait a second. We're no longer on physical Earth below those thresholds anymore. I mean, that's the thing of it. We're already above those lines that main spirit guides indicate. So that main spirit guides indicate if there is certain turbulence, should already be saved. And I don't think that there's a need for it, because I do believe that morality, and goodness and the safety of those places, I believe in that sort of thing. I really do believe that the afterlife in regards to physical Earth-based humans and other kinds of physical that spirit guides indicate, specifically in regards to physical Earth-based, is moral, good, and just. It really does point towards that. I think that they're careful in regards to revealing certain kinds of information, but they also let know of the darker aspects by way of distressing NDEs. Yeah, there you go. There is those ones in which exist where there was negative experiences, which again, knocks at that door that there is that sort of thing. But what's interesting is that it's done in a certain fashion where it doesn't necessarily let you know that it's, that there's some negative that is being done in a societal sort of fashion. And some of it's decent. That's the truth of it. Well, multiple kinds to a certain extent. Okay. So, regardless, there is, multiple tells and let knows that exists. In different kinds of capacities. Again, I'll run down yesterday to a certain extent. Let's see. A couple of mundane things, regular actions. So there was a little bit of a change in my process. And if you watch the Alex James Hislop diary entries and the AJH daily defensives and that sort of stuff, you'll get a tell as to what that is. You can look up the dates before, the date that I'm currently recording this broadcast. And it's June 17th, 2019. So in the last AJH Daily Defensives, something happened where right after they sort of, certain spirits approached my process in a different style, a different fashion. There was less aggressiveness in the channel. There was sort of this let know that they're going to be, trying to ease up in certain fashions. And there was also events taking place behind the scenes spiritually, which kind of felt like there was spirits maneuvering in to protect certain kinds of beings of Earth and others, in a certain capacity. So there is, again, multiple down here. So, but one of the things that happened was that, I went to sleep that night, so that the rest of the day was really good, was really decent, so says, although there was still that let know that something wasn't quite, something, there was something rotten in Denver. There was that sort of thing. Which, I don't know if that lets me know that maybe in another process, someone, there was a lot of overload happening there, or certain spirits are traversing over there, whatever it might have been. But then, I went to sleep and woke up, and I kind of felt like throughout the night, I woke up with that lucid kind of feeling, certain layers to myself kind of thinned out in a certain manner, a little bit groggy, a bit, to a certain extent. But even, discounting certain things that happened throughout the night, you sort of take a look at the next day, which would be, June 16th, and, multiple things throughout it were just a couple things, eating some sandwiches, playing some video games, watching some content, and pursuing intimacy. So again, I watch a certain movie, and a certain kind of storyline happens around me where it's sort of being insinuated that, at times, that this story is going to, potentially be utilized against myself in certain manners. So I'm wondering if it has to do with like the archetype of Alex or something else in that regard, or if it's more personal in a certain kind of way. And, regardless, I kind of looked around and I'm like, I don't know if I recognized that then, but I still kind of looked around and it's like, still, there's something about it that's just not right. If you see certain themes within a movie, and it relates to your life, and the spiritual let know that certain negative spirits might use this to harm you and attack you, it still can be disconcerting. But it's not only that, but it's also certain kinds of things where, certain spirit want that story to blossom in a certain kind of way, which lets me know that maybe we need some content experience access to be able to vent our aggression. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but again, so, it was one of those things where I noticed, like, all throughout, just themes in regards to myself and another family member, as well as others, again, which I'm hoping is not used against me in certain ways. I am advocating for what my main spirit guides indicated regarding the way my main spirit guides indicated. And I'm going to run down just the, I'm going to run down, let's see here. We'll run down the disclaimers here. Alex James Hislop, Maincap's main spirit guides. Maincap's current information from the light takes priority in regards to what Maincap indicated, the way Maincap indicated. Maincap's current information from the light regarding what Maincap indicated in regards to myself and others to Vadra for what they chose for us in regards to this portion of the disclaimers takes priority how Maincap indicated in light, the way Maincap indicated in light. Maincap's current information for what they chose for us in regards to this portion of the disclaimers takes priority how Maincap indicated in light, the way Maincap indicated in light. Maincap's current information for what they chose for the AJH Radio Free Earth June 17th, 2019, information that may cap indicated, as well as other information that may cap indicated, takes priority how may cap indicated, like the way may cap indicated, like any grammatical errors, etc., defined by main cap within this content, etc., defined by cap that main cap indicated can be clarified by main cap's information and should not deter from the information within this content and what main cap indicated, the way main cap indicated for myself and others defined by cap. All that is, the dimensions, especially far relate, as well as what main cap indicated, are defined by main spirit guides, the way main spirit guides indicated in the light. Main spirit guides chain of command is fully defined by main spirit guides in the light, the way main spirit guides indicated in the light. I and others defined by main cap are advocating for what main cap chose for us in regards to the AJH Radio Free Earth, June 17th, 2019 information that may cap indicated, the way may cap indicated. I and others defined by main cap are advocating for safety in regards to those editors, etc., defined by main cap, that main cap indicated in regards to this content, and what main cap indicated, the way main cap indicated. I and others defined by main cap are advocating for the digital teams that main cap indicated to receive what main cap indicated, especially the protection that main cap indicated, the way main cap indicated, light, dark, and those that main cap indicated, do what main cap indicated in regards to this content, the way main cap indicated, light. Main cap's main spirit guides, I'm Alex James Hislop. I and others defined we can testify in regards to what main cap indicated in regards to the AJH Radio Free Earth, June 17th, 2019, and others, to advocate the way Mancap indicated. And I and others, to advocate, are advocating for healing and protection, as well as what Mancap indicated in regards to the AJH Radio Free Earth, June 17th, 2019, and others, to advocate the way Mancap indicated. I and others, to advocate guides, are advocating for YouTube, Radionomy, and the other content upload platforms that Main Spirit Guides indicated to be protected, defended, healed, etc. To find Main Spirit Guides, Main Spirit Guides need a matter of the content platforms that Main Spirit Guides need to be defended. Yeah, so with that being said, yesterday, again, sort of not necessarily conversing with the spirit as much, and kind of an easing up in regards to certain kind of conversation, and as well as, other things too. I kind of just chilled out that day because it was sort of a bit of a day off in regards to myself. I did sort of, then it segued. There was another sort of thing that happened where I played some video games. And again, I felt this large kind of a brouhaha happen in regards to one of my games kind of stalling. And in the spirit, there was some turbulence in regards to it, because we do play certain kind of gaming, and at times I have noticed the kind of interaction that happens within those video games, that there is certain kinds of things in regards to them. And, upon me leaving the computer room and shutting off my computer, I kind of felt like this upsetness kind of take place. But, I think that spirits were sort of, that it was situated in a certain way. I think there is a lot of situating. I think there's a lot of safety in regards to some of this. At times, though, I think it does need to be understood that I think that there hasn't been certain kinds of safety. Again, I'd get to that sort of thing where, I'd eat a sandwich and someone's like, if you don't eat this sandwich, you'd save a certain spirit behind the scenes. There's certain things like that where I get that let know, where certain spiritual interaction and that sort of culture that says you can save people by way of just, certain kind of frugality, just backing away from, put the sandwich down, Alex, you don't need to eat that much. And you could save a bunch of spirits by way of doing that. And I'm not saying that there isn't certain kinds of things in regards to it, because at times within my process, there has been that let know that, some of that has been utilized in certain kinds of fashion, which have not lent towards certain spirit being saved and protected in a certain manner. But I think that there is those who do it in a legit sort of way. So, again, the resources in regards to and one of the biggest ones, though, was last night, and the kind of attack that was happening to me spiritually. I tried pursuing intimacy in a certain kind of way, and it kind of felt like there was this, again, upsetness in regards to it. Again, regular actions, regular run-of-the-mill actions sort of being utilized. And I think that they're doing that sort of thing to say that somehow certain spirits had a reason for certain kind of attacking in regards to some who were doing nothing wrong but living regular life. And it's that sort of thing that they sort of in a process. And again, I have felt that spotlight, that sort of fame on me. You do that to a certain kind, specifically in regards to ones who are putting advocations, specifications, disclaimers into play, and that sort of thing. And you can see why there'd be certain kind of spotlight and awareness in regards to this process at times. In which has been, I think, utilized against the general population in regards to physical earth-based and other summoning spirit guides in certain manners. Today, it felt like a bit of a mediation and legal kind of day, but it's that sort of thing where, this sort of, there was a bit of an implosion. Again, this sort of the way of going about things, kind of backing away and not attacking me, and sort of see how he can sort of say he doesn't need to defend himself anymore. And, doing that for 2 weeks straight. And maybe then seeing what it would be, because, these 2-3 days kind of stuff is not happening. And if it has to be based off of that, again, if he's complaining about defending himself and he doesn't need to complain about defending himself, I mean, it's just one of those. I mean, that's really it. But, regular actions and that sort of tethering in regards to immorality and things of that nature, the let know of in regards to certain regards, I think is decent. And you should live your life to a certain extent. If anyone out there is worried about, eating the rest of that half sandwich or whatever it is, you shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to worry about that. You shouldn't have to sacrifice a bunch of different things in regards to your life. I really do truly believe that. And it's not just in regards to those who've been hurt spiritually. It's also in regards to those who haven't. We should be able to live decent lives, and one of them really does stem in regards to that, because it's a big one. If we're able to facilitate certain ways of life, and that is the truth of it, then it just it just sort of falls apart to a certain extent. That's really it's one of the main ones, and potentially more than that one. It really is. And I'll let know of it in further content experiences down the road, but it's just one of those things where that's some of the sort of spotlight in regards to the utilization of my process to harm others in certain kinds of ways. It's not the only one. I mean, again, storylines being flourished here and then utilized in other places to a certain extent. There is multiple kinds of other utilization similar to that. And I think that it really does matter to sort of understand and how to be able to defend from that. I don't think we have to worry about that. I think we should, spotlight that information from these spiritualist communities that made spirit guides to get to a certain degree. Again, one of the big let knows is that sort of separation that some spirit have been doing at times in regards to spiritualist communities. Sowing discord. You talk about sowing, and certain processes and friendships and relationships and how important that is. Well, that really does matter. I mean, and this was a let know way back when, within the past half year, if not the past year, that there was potentially things taking place in regards to spiritualist communities in which made certain kind of contact and communication, which down the road it might be problematic. It's one of those where we want to situate it now, and we want in the ways that main spirit guides negate pertaining to what main spirit guides negated, the way main guides negated. Again, it's one of those things where we want to be, together in a certain manner. And I know that can be difficult in regards to certain aspects of the spiritual. I don't understand what that interaction is, to have a certain person in front of the scenes and to be able to see and interact with in a certain kind of way, to be able to say, whoa, I mean, he wants to go that direction. I don't know if I agree. Look at all the other cultures that exist in regards to this place. So it's one of those where, you take a look at physical Earth, and there's been a focus on it, partially by way of me being able to see it, partially me being able to sense it. And that's a big part of it. But once you start bringing in the other spiritual cultures, and how much more difficult does it become? How much more difficult shouldn't it be? Because what if it's the same damn thing? What if all them, certain spiritual culture and, in front of the scenes, which can be considered spiritual in a certain manner, do agree on a certain path? I mean, once you get to those sort of areas, it's like, okay, well, that's fairly set. So, I mean, that was one of the things that happened. There was a certain kind of vindication that happened today, too, because I knew that after the events that happened yesterday, which felt like a certain kind of implosion, a certain kind of not working out, in which lent towards a certain kind of spiritual turbulence and battle, which is already happening in a certain context. And I want what, the positivity and the ripple effect action economics information that main spirit guides needed to be displayed. Awareness guides needed, because I don't want my conversations regarding these sort of topics and subjects impacting the things that main spirit guides negated in the fashions that main spirit guides needed, the way guides needed. We still need to be able to talk about this specifically in the areas that main spirit guides negated, which are going to be shoehorned in there, in which it is important to be able to talk about with, which, that sort of ripple effect action economics needs to, situate that, further down the line in the spiritual that main spirit guides indicated. And there's a lot of positivity on this earth. There's more positivity and peace than there is warfare, and that is the truth. That is the case of it. No, it outweighs it. I believe it does. See, now that's interesting. I don't know about the sadness and depression. If you were to stack the violence, harm, suffering, sadness, and depression, and you were to weigh it against the morality, positivity, goodness, I don't know which one is. But, sadness, I'm asking for the sadness information that main spirit guys need to be spirit awareness guys need, the way guys need. Maybe people need to be able to be sad. Again, it's a different kind of look to a certain extent. I still don't think it warrants certain kind of spirits attacking and gaining access to this place in certain manners. My information only pertains to what main spirit guides indicated, the way main spirit guides indicated, the information that main spirit guides indicated only pertains to what main spirit guides indicated in regards to this marking application, etc. To find main spirit guides, the way main spirit guides indicated. Again, good guys, that's the truth of it. All right, well then, fine. That is the case of it. Anyhow, so that was what was seen